Good morning, Magic! I'm Gavin Verhey from Wizards of the Coast, and one of my favorite things about Commander is when someone plays a card you have never seen before. In a format where almost anything is legal, it's awesome to see what gems people can dig up to put into their decks. And so I thought today I would cover 4 such cards. You've probably never heard of them, but they're quite strong. Let's dig in. Alright, imagine this. It's late in a Commander game and you have a bunch of creatures in play. You attack your opponent, you manage to get through, they don't block, they're a bunch of small piddly creatures, no big deal. And then you tap 3 mana and cast Mercadia's Downfall. The backbone of so many players' Commander decks are almost entirely non-basic lands, so it's easy for this to grant plus 6, 7, 8, 9, or even 10 power to all of your creatures. That can take your opponent to dead in the blink of an eye. It of course is great with any kind of evasion, like flying or trample, but if you have double strike around, hey, that's great too. Okay, now I'm ready for card number 2. Let's say you're being attacked by a bunch of huge creatures. I don't know, maybe they cast Mercadia's Downfall. You don't know what you're gonna do? Well, don't worry, we've got equal treatment. This card is criminally underplayed. In fact, on EDH Rec, there are only 57 decks with this in it. You could be number 58. Why is this good? Well, a lot of Commander games boil down to one big play by someone at the end of the game, whether it's a Craterhoof Behemoth to kill you with creatures, or a big spell to deal a bunch of damage to your face. This card prevents both of those from killing you off. Additionally, it's really good against damage-based board sweepers. You're gonna cast Blasphemous Act for 13 damage? Well, how about 2 damage instead? And even the floor on this card is totally fine. If it's rotting away in your hand, you can just cycle it for 2 mana. I picked this one up from some guy named Sheldon Menery, who's done a lot of great work with this card, so give it a try. Now, before we go on to card number 3, I have something to say. You should be playing more color hate cards in your Commander decks. Now, to be clear, I'm not talking about the ones that punish your opponents. Cards like Boil or Flash Fires are not things I really want in my Commander games. But there's a whole class of cards in Magic that reward you for your opponent playing a certain color. And in a 4-player game of Commander, it's very likely that color will be at the table. Now, I know it's a little bit scary, because if your opponent isn't one of those colors, then your card is kind of dead. Or if you draw it after that player has been eliminated, well, it's dead again. To the first one, especially if you're hitting some of the most popular Commander colors, you're pretty safe. And to the second one, there are all kinds of cards you can draw late in the game that aren't very good. You can draw Rampant Growth on turn 10, and even though it's great early, you don't really want to draw it then. But despite this, the only one I really ever see played is Carpet of Flowers, and there are so many other good options. So that brings me to card number 3. Insight. When was the last time you sat down at a Commander table and there were no green decks? It's a very uncommon occurrence. And green decks cast tons of spells. With their accelerated mana, it's easy to cast a lot of things in one turn. If a card like Phyrexian Arena is good enough for your deck, Insight almost definitely is. There are plenty of Commander tables where Insight will even be better than Rhystic Study. Especially if you're playing with me, because I always pay the 1. And that brings us to our 4th card, another color hate card. Or at least a your color helps me style card. I don't know what they should be called. Anyway, the card is Reap. This card regrowths a card from your graveyard to your hand for every black permanent target player controls. So regrowth itself sees a decent amount of play in Commander, and most of the time this will do regrowth just fine. But a lot of the time, you'll be able to get back 2, 3, 4, or even more cards from your graveyard for just 2 mana. There are actually a number of green cards I commonly play that hate on black cards. One big one is Compost, by the way. If you're not playing this card, it is fantastic. For 2 mana, you're gonna draw so many cards over the course of a game. Anyway, back to Reap. Unlike most of our multi-regrowth style effects, this one doesn't exile. So that means you can reap a regrowth and then regrowth the reap and keep the whole chain rolling. So I told you about 4 underrated cards, one for white, blue, green, and red. But if there was a black one on this list, what would it be? Let me know in the comments below what your pick for underrated black card in Commander is. I hope you enjoyed this and that you try out some of these cards in your decks. I'll talk with you again on Friday. And in the meantime, you find plenty of obscure cards to crush your opponents with. You got this. Now, I just looked up the developer notes for Thopter Foundry, and those are still around. And the cards stayed pretty much the same, with one huge difference. Originally, there was no 1 mana cost to sacrifice your artifact. Now that's huge. As I just described with the Sword of the Meat combo, that's the difference between infinite Thopters and Thopters equal to the amount of mana you have. Now in Magic design, we call this a mana gate.